Mistress secretly meets millionaire husband at night, but his wife was already waiting for them. The night air crackled with unspoken tensions as a sleek black Bentley glided along the deserted road in Greenwood Hills. Beneath the glow of flickering streetlights, a figure waited in the shadows, no one but the millionaire himself, James Maxwell, stepping out onto the pavement in silence. His heart pounded with a dangerous thrill, for he was about to meet Vanessa, his clandestine lover. Little did either know that someone else was watching. Somewhere, shrouded in the darkness, stood another figure, Margaret Maxwell, James's elegant wife, who had pieced together fragments of suspicion to form a harrowing plan. Tonight, the truth would blaze into the open. The morning sun in Greenwood Hills streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Maxwell mansion, bathing the marble floors in a shimmering glow. Standing in the foyer, Margaret Maxwell exuded the calm composure of a woman who had everything under control. She was tall, with chestnut hair that framed a face marked by equal parts intelligence and pride. As she flipped through the mail, her eyes landed on a plain white envelope, no return address, no hint of who might have sent it. Inside, there was a single typed note. "Your husband isn't who you think he is." Margaret's heart fluttered for an instant, but she pressed her lips into a tight line and slid the letter into her purse. This wasn't the first sign of trouble she had received in recent weeks. Strange phone calls at odd hours, cryptic messages about James's late nights at the office, rumors swirling among the Greenwood Hills elite. None had ever been this direct. A part of her wanted to confront him immediately. Yet another part, the more calculating side that had propelled her to the top of the city's philanthropic social circle, told her to bide her time. She could not accuse her husband, the wealthy real estate mogul, without solid proof. That afternoon, Margaret prepared for a luncheon at the Greenwood Country Club, an exclusive gathering spot for the town's most influential women. She dressed impeccably in a cream silk blouse and a fitted pencil skirt, sliding her arms into a tailored blazer that highlighted her trim figure. Her diamond wedding ring sparkled under the overhead lights, a physical reminder of the vow she had made to James nearly 20 years earlier. Holding on to her composure, she left the mansion, letting the private driver navigate the winding tree-lined streets. At the country club, small talk fluttered among women who prided themselves on their refined manners and impeccable social standing. As Margaret sipped her peppermint tea, she heard hushed discussions, rumors that James was spotted in a downtown hotel late at night, glimpses of him dining with an unknown woman in a discreet private booth. No one spoke these details directly to Margaret's face, but she could sense the concerned or perhaps curious glances aimed in her direction. Determined to keep her composure, she focused on her philanthropic project, a fundraiser for the Greenwood Children's Hospital. Her posture remained erect, her expression warm but reserved, and her voice steady as she discussed donation drives. Yet beneath this veneer, a tempest raged. She recalled how James had once been an attentive, loving husband. He had charmed her with spontaneous gestures, surprise bouquets of roses, weekend escapes to Paris, and whispered promises of forever. In the last year, though, her world had started to tilt. He began returning home late, claiming board meetings or last-minute deals with foreign investors. Occasionally, the faint smell of perfume that wasn't hers lingered on his clothes. When the luncheon ended, Margaret excused herself from the polite chatter and slipped away into the corridor leading to the parking lot. She leaned against the cool concrete wall, her mind spinning with questions. Everything felt precarious, balanced on a razor's edge. The note in her purse burned through the leather, as if taunting her with the secrets she had yet to uncover. Little did she know that very night, a new chapter of her life would unfold, and the first whispers of betrayal, once gentle as a breeze, would soon roar like a tempest destined to tear everything apart. Across town, in a small yet elegantly furnished apartment, Vanessa Pierce paced the length of her living room. The freshly renovated space featured chic grey walls and sophisticated artwork, purchased with the generous allowances James Maxwell had been supplying her with for nearly a year. She paused at a marble-topped console, nervously drumming her manicured nails against it, trying to quell the unease that had settled into her stomach. Vanessa was not the typical stereotype of a mistress, gold-digging or superficial. She was a woman with a complicated past, haunted by a family she had left behind in a smaller town just outside Chicago. Friends from her old life knew her as bright, ambitious, and fiercely independent. Yet time and harsh circumstances had whittled away her innocence, leaving behind a woman who found herself entangled in a relationship that contradicted her original values. She had never believed she'd be the other woman. Yet here she was, enveloped in a cycle of lavish gifts, emotionally charged secrets, and stolen nights. It had started innocently enough. A year ago, she attended a real estate expo in Greenwood Hills, hoping to network. She had dreams of opening her own interior design firm, and she thought meeting influential people in real estate might give her the break she needed. That was where she first encountered James Maxwell, charming, dapper, and exuding unshakable confidence. He had approached her after a seminar, praising her keen insights on design trends. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, quickly shifting from professional topics to more personal terrain. As the evening wound down, James had invited her for a drink in one of the expo's exclusive lounges. In retrospect, Vanessa recalled the fleeting pang of guilt that hit her when he mentioned he was married. But he also painted a picture of a lonely, misunderstood man whose wife had grown distant. He claimed their relationship was more of a business partnership now, devoid of real affection. Eager to believe she wasn't wrecking a home, Vanessa allowed herself to become entangled in James's life. The promises he made, help with her design business, emotional support, and a bright future, lured her deeper into a maze of moral compromise. Over time, the relationship took root in late-night rendezvous at five-star hotels, hush-hush phone calls, and expensive gifts that made her feel both adored and uneasy. Vanessa had never known someone who could make her feel so significant and so guilty at the same time. Gradually, she found herself trapped between fervent love for James and the bone-deep shame of being his secret. She tried to end it once, but James's tearful late-night plea, followed by yet another promise to leave Margaret, pulled her back in. On this day, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Vanessa reread a message from James. "Meet me at the estate orchard at midnight. We need to talk." She knew the orchard well. James owned a sprawling estate outside Greenwood Hills, and he sometimes used the private orchard for quiet reflection. The coded text stirred dread in Vanessa. Something was different this time. He sounded more urgent, more desperate, as though a storm was on the horizon and they were running out of time. Standing beside a large window that overlooked a row of neatly manicured hedges, Vanessa stared at her reflection in the glass. A million questions raced through her mind. Is he finally going to tell Margaret the truth? Is there a chance he discovered something about me that I haven't shared? Has she grown suspicious? She swallowed hard, tucking a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. As night descended, she had to make a choice. Run now and avoid the inevitable fallout, or risk everything for the chance to be with the man she was beginning to love. In a moment of determination, Vanessa grabbed her designer coat, set her chin high, and resolved to meet James later that night. Everything, her integrity, her future, possibly even her safety, hinged on what would happen beneath that orchard's moonlit canopy. Inside his expansive private study, James Maxwell stared intently at the documents spread across his mahogany desk. The polished surface reflected his conflicted expression. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence built over years of business negotiations, James had forged an empire in real estate. However, at this moment, the steady confidence that usually defined him was nowhere to be found. Instead, worry lines creased his forehead, and his hands occasionally formed tight fists on the desk. In the solitude of that opulent room, where leather-bound books lined the shelves and a crystal chandelier cast shifting patterns of light, James pondered how it had all come to this. When he first met Margaret, He had been a young entrepreneur with big dreams and no safety net. Margaret came from old money and offered him the societal connections that accelerated his rise in the business world. Their marriage was, at first, filled with genuine affection and an alignment of ambitions. They built their life together, forging a partnership that seemed unstoppable to outsiders. Yet as the years passed, both became more consumed by their respective roles, Margaret as the philanthropist and socialite maintaining high society ties, and James as the relentless businessman chasing the next lucrative deal. Romance dwindled between them, leaving James feeling as if he was living with a congenial roommate rather than a passionate partner. Then he met Vanessa, and something unspoken inside him awakened. She brought back emotions he hadn't felt in years: excitement, uncertainty, and a craving to be seen as more than a business machine. Navigating the double life he created was a delicate dance. He juggled philanthropic appearances with Margaret and secret weekend getaways with Vanessa. He had convinced himself that, eventually, he would find a way to end one relationship cleanly and pursue the other. Yet he never found the courage to follow through. Instead, excuses mounted. Margaret needed him during a tricky business merger, a sudden family tragedy demanded stability, or the real estate market was too volatile to risk any scandal. Now, whisperings had reached him through his business associates. He'd learned that anonymous letters were circulating, that hushed gossip among Greenwood Hills elite suggested a major scandal brewing. His carefully constructed facade was on the verge of crumbling. No matter how deft he was at the art of evasion, secrets like his did not remain hidden forever. That knowledge pressed down on him like a heavy weight, leading to desperate plans to meet Vanessa in the orchard under the cover of night. He glanced at his phone. 11:30. An hour from now, the orchard would be cloaked in moonlight. He could already picture Vanessa waiting under the tall apple trees, anxious and beautiful. He resolved to be there. He owed her at least an explanation, if not a final decision. The question was, which path would he choose? Anxious energy built in the pit of his stomach as he finally stood and paced the length of the study. He paused at a portrait on the wall, a beaming wedding photograph of him and Margaret, taken decades earlier. In that snapshot, they looked so young, so certain of a bright future. Guilt jabbed at him like a needle. He did care for Margaret, but the spark was gone, or so he told himself, ignoring the complexity of his emotions. Still, she was not just a business partner. She was family. Confronted by the swirling chaos of his own thoughts, James grabbed his jacket from the leather armchair and flicked off the light. He took one last look around the shadowy study, then closed the door behind him. Tonight, his double life would collide with a force that neither Vanessa nor Margaret, and not even James himself, could anticipate. A light wind rustled the leaves of the Maxwell estate orchard, casting dancing shadows across the grassy paths. The moon was a silver disk, suspended in a sea of stars. Beneath its glow, the orchard took on an almost ethereal atmosphere. Rows of apple trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches gently swaying in the night breeze. Vanessa arrived first, parking her compact car a short distance from the estate's tall iron gates. Carefully, she slipped through a small side entrance James had told her about months before. Her heart thumped an erratic beat as she navigated the winding path by the faint glow of her phone's flashlight. The orchard was eerily quiet, save for the soft chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, the chill in the air mingling with the nervous energy radiating through her body. Finding a small clearing where the moonlight fell in a gentle pool, she paused, breathing in the scent of fresh grass and the faint sweetness of fruit. This place brought back memories of other clandestine meetings, shared kisses by moonlight, whispered declarations of love, and the unspoken promise that eventually they'd stand here without guilt weighing upon them. Tonight, however, felt vastly different. An impending sense of dread clung to every moment. Several minutes passed before she heard the crunch of gravel. James appeared, his silhouette emerging from behind a row of trees. He wore a dark overcoat, hair slightly disheveled from the breeze. The worry etched across his face was immediate, doing little to mask his relief upon seeing her. He closed the distance between them, tentatively taking Vanessa's trembling hands in his. "You came," he murmured, voice low. "I wasn't sure if you would." "How could I not?" Vanessa replied, searching his eyes for reassurance. "What's going on, James? You sounded worried in your message." He cast a quick glance around, as if confirming they were alone. I've been getting these letters, Vanessa. Warnings that someone knows about us. About everything." He paused, exhaling slowly. "I can't keep living like this. I have to make a decision." Vanessa's chest tightened. She had waited for this conversation for what felt like an eternity. Still, the gravity in his voice made her stomach lurch. "Are you finally going to tell Margaret? Or—" Her voice faltered. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear him say it. "Or is this goodbye?" James shook his head wearily. "I don't know. It's not fair to any of us, especially you, to let things continue this way, but I fear what happens next. Margaret is powerful, Vanessa. If she finds out about us, the fallout could be enormous, not just for me, but for everyone." A flurry of emotions tore at Vanessa's mind: love, guilt, fear, and a fierce spark of defiance. The unspoken threat of Margaret's wrath lingered in the air. Before she could respond, the soft snap of a twig from the darkness made them both freeze. In a heartbeat, a figure stepped into the moonlit clearing. The poised silhouette belonged to Margaret Maxwell. Her face glimmered pale in the silvery light, revealing an expression that was a complex tangle of anger, heartbreak, and steely resolve. She wore a tailored dark suit that seemed to blend into the shadows, only her regal posture giving her away. For a moment, no one breathed. Vanessa felt a surge of fear seize her chest. James stared at his wife, torn between shame and astonishment. The orchard grew still, like the calm before a ferocious storm. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice carried the clipped precision of a blade. "I was wondering how long it would take you two to meet here. It looks like my patience has finally paid off." In that moment, the orchard, once a place of stolen romance, became the setting for a confrontation that would forever alter their destinies. Margaret's gaze flickered between James and Vanessa, pinning them in place as though they were disobedient children caught red-handed. Moonlight traced the tight line of her jaw, reflecting off the hint of tears that threatened to form in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, imagining how she would confront her unfaithful husband and his mistress. Now the reality was far more excruciating than any fantasy she had conjured. Slowly, Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a small stack of photographs. Without a word, she thrust them toward James. He hesitated, then gingerly took the pictures, a flush of dread creeping up his neck. The photos revealed candid shots of him meeting Vanessa outside a luxury hotel downtown, walking into her apartment building, even dining by candlelight at a secluded restaurant. In every image, James's face and Vanessa's form were unmistakably clear. "I hired a private investigator," Margaret stated, her voice brittle. "I didn't want to believe the rumors, but here's the truth for all of us to see." Vanessa felt an electric jolt of panic. Her eyes flicked to James, searching for a reaction, some sign that he could mend this breach. But James stood as rigid as a statue, shock rippling through his features. When did you—" James began, but Margaret cut him off. "Does it matter? I was thorough, though I must say I never expected to find you here tonight. I had no idea about this orchard rendezvous until your text messages were forwarded to me from someone who claims to be concerned about my welfare." She glared at James with an expression of both rage and hurt. Then her gaze fell on Vanessa, eyes glittering with contempt. "Tell me, Miss Pierce, how long have you been enjoying my husband's company?" Vanessa's entire body trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words failed her. She wanted to say something that might soothe Margaret's obvious heartbreak, but how could she possibly defend herself? And James, Margaret continued, turning her wrath back on him, was it worth it, all these lies and deceptions? I stood by your side, defended you, trusted you, and for what? The orchard buzzed with silent tension, the night air thick with the tang of confrontation. James swallowed hard, stepping forward to touch Margaret's arm, but she recoiled. The intimate gesture ignited her fury, and she took a decisive step back. "Don't," she hissed. "Don't you dare pretend you care right now. Not after you've humiliated me, turned our marriage into a joke behind my back." James's voice finally broke through the tension. "Margaret, listen to me. I never meant to hurt you. Things just got complicated. We lost something between us." Margaret cut him off again, her words slicing the air. "Don't lay the blame on what we lost. You went looking for excitement elsewhere, James, and now we both pay the price." Vanessa, feeling an urgent need to defend herself, found her voice. "Mrs. Maxwell, I'm sorry. I never meant to destroy your life." Margaret leveled a stare at the younger woman. "I'm sure you didn't. And yet here we are, standing in the dark like thieves. You might not have intended it, but you should have known better." The orchard swayed with the weight of their collective emotions. A distant rumble of thunder hinted at a storm forming beyond the hills, as if nature itself responded to the tumult of their meeting. Margaret exhaled, a ragged breath, her eyes glistening. She slid her gaze over the couple once more. "I want you both to understand something," she said, pressing her trembling lips into a thin line. "I'm not just going to slink away in heartbreak. There will be repercussions for this, for both of you, I promise." With that, Margaret turned and strode away from the clearing, her footsteps muffled by the soft grass. James and Vanessa stood in stunned silence, a swirl of guilt, shame, and dread coursing through them. Moments later, the sound of Margaret's retreating footsteps disappeared entirely, leaving the orchard enveloped in tense stillness once again. But the damage was done. Everything had changed, and the echoes of betrayal lingered in the midnight air like a curse. In the days that followed the midnight confrontation, the Maxwell mansion became a battleground of whispered arguments and icy silences. James found himself sleeping in one of the guest rooms, while Margaret maintained a stoic front in the master suite. The staff tiptoed around, sensing the volatile atmosphere, but daring not to gossip openly. Everywhere James turned, he felt the weight of judgment, some from the house staff who avoided eye contact, some from the glances Margaret threw him when they crossed paths in silent hallways. Margaret had not yet made a public statement about their marriage, but that did little to quell the rumors swirling around Greenwood Hills. Whispers grew among the city's elite, and soon local tabloids picked up on the possibility of an explosive scandal. James tried to conduct business as usual, but found it nearly impossible to focus. Potential investors hesitated to schedule meetings, citing concerns about the swirling gossip. Shares in Maxwell Properties began a slow yet noticeable decline, a reflection of the eroding confidence in his once unassailable reputation. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life took a drastic turn. She was awakened one morning by an insistent knocking on her apartment door. Bleary-eyed, she opened it to find two stern-faced men in suits. With curt politeness, they handed her a formal eviction notice. Confusion and panic churned in her stomach as she read the legalese. Though the apartment's lease was under a holding company affiliated with James, the notice indicated that the lease had been abruptly terminated. Moments later, Vanessa's phone buzzed. It was her bank. They informed her that a substantial monthly deposit she normally relied on had been cancelled by the sender, James Maxwell. She stared at her phone, mind reeling. James had always assured her she'd be taken care of no matter what. Now everything pointed to the possibility that Margaret had frozen James's ability to provide financial support, or that James himself had withdrawn his assistance out of panic. With tears burning in her eyes, Vanessa made frantic calls to James. Each went straight to voicemail. Hours crawled by with no response. Fear and despair mingled as she began to pack her belongings, unsure of where she would go. She thought about her parents back in Chicago, how she'd left them under strained circumstances years ago. She imagined the shame of returning now, jobless and mired in scandal. Still, she had no other options. By late afternoon, she had booked a one-way ticket to Chicago for the following day. Her phone remained silent. No comforting word or message from James ever arrived. Back at the Maxwell mansion, James was under siege from Margaret's attorneys. He discovered Margaret had placed a temporary freeze on joint accounts, an aggressive legal maneuver to prevent him from funneling any funds into unknown investments. Over dinner one evening, both sitting at opposite ends of the long dining table, Margaret informed him matter-of-factly that she had arranged a meeting with her lawyers to discuss the terms of a potential separation. Separation? James echoed, voice tight with disbelief. Margaret, must it really come to that? Margaret, poised as ever, dabbed a napkin at the corner of her mouth and met his gaze. You humiliated me, James, and you dare ask if it must come to this? Yes, we need to talk about separation, or at least renegotiating our marriage contract. You see, I'm not going to let you walk away free to do whatever you want. There will be conditions. Her words chilled him to the bone. With the rumor mill abuzz, business faltering, and Margaret on a warpath, James felt the carefully curated life he'd built threatened to collapse entirely. Late that night, when he finally powered on his phone, he saw the missed calls from Vanessa. He wanted to call her back, to comfort her. But in the quiet darkness of his temporary room, he realized that every choice he made from here on out would carry profound consequences. Hesitating, he eventually succumbed to exhaustion, still tormented by guilt. By the time he drifted into a fitful sleep, Vanessa was already boarding a plane, leaving Greenwood Hills and the shattered remnants of their affair behind. Margaret awoke the next morning to the soft buzz of her phone on the nightstand. A text from her longtime friend and confidant, Alice Peterson, lit up the screen. Heard about the separation rumors. Let's meet. No judgments, just support. XO Alice. Sighing, Margaret felt a pang of relief. While her social circle was rife with opportunists and gossip seekers, Alice was a genuine friend from her college days. She had been one of the few people Margaret trusted without reservation. Despite her anger and heartbreak, Margaret found solace in the thought that she wasn't completely alone. Downstairs she encountered James in the kitchen, a rare occurrence these days, given their tense avoidance of each other. He looked more disheveled than usual, dark circles beneath his eyes. Silence stretched between them as she poured herself a cup of coffee, then retreated to the sunlit breakfast nook. James cleared his throat. Margaret, I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. She didn't reply, just stirred her coffee and stared into the swirling liquid. After a moment she raised her eyes to him and let out a slow breath. Apology noted. I have a meeting with my lawyer at noon. We'll be discussing potential terms. He nodded, resignation painting his features. All right, was all he managed to say before turning away, shoulders sagging. The painful tension between them had never felt heavier. Later that morning, Margaret drove to meet Alice at a cozy cafe tucked in a quieter part of Greenwood Hills. The warm scent of freshly baked bread and brewed coffee provided a comforting backdrop. Sliding into a booth across from Alice, Margaret welcomed the embrace of a friend who greeted her with compassion rather than pity. So, Alice began softly, what now? Margaret shrugged, sipping her latte. I'm meeting the lawyer today. My mind is jumbled with everything, rage, heartbreak, humiliation, but also a strange sense of determination. She pressed her lips together. I refuse to be just the scorned wife who gets cast aside while James gallivants around. If this ends, it ends on my terms. Alice reached across the table, giving Margaret's hand a gentle squeeze. That's the Margaret I know. Strong, poised, unwilling to be a victim. You have every right to see this through however you see fit. The conversation meandered through the complexities of the situation, from the potential financial ramifications to the emotional toll of a public scandal. Margaret confided her plans to focus more on her philanthropic efforts, particularly the Greenwood Children's Hospital. "If I'm going to endure this public embarrassment, I'll use the attention to shed light on something positive," she told Alice, her voice gaining a steely edge of resolve. On her way back to the mansion, Margaret reflected on how betrayal had a way of clarifying priorities. She envisioned her next steps. If the marriage ended in separation or even divorce, she wanted to ensure her philanthropic work continued unimpeded. She also realized that, strangely, she might rediscover a part of herself she had long neglected, her independent spirit, her individual ambitions. For too long, she had allowed her identity to merge with James's business empire. That afternoon, she met with her attorney, Adrian Clark, a formidable woman known for her tenacity in court. Over crisp sheets of legal paperwork, they discussed asset divisions, personal protections, and public relations strategies. Although Margaret's chest tightened at the thought of ending such a significant chapter of her life, a faint spark of liberation flickered within her. As night approached, Margaret found herself standing on the terrace of the mansion, gazing at the orchard in the distance. Memories of that fateful confrontation still weighed on her, but now they felt like the foundation on which she would build her new sense of self. The seeds of her resolve had been planted, and though the road ahead promised storms, she felt an unexpected surge of hope. At the very least, she was done waiting in the shadows. A week had passed since Vanessa fled Greenwood Hills in a cloud of shame and regret. Arriving in Chicago, she crashed on the couch in her childhood home, which her mother still owned. Sleep eluded her, guilt gnawed at her, and she wore her heartbreak like a heavy coat she couldn't take off. Each day she dreaded the question from her mother, what happened out there in Greenwood Hills? But so far, her mother had only shown patience and concern, never prying beyond what Vanessa was ready to share. Still, the oppressive atmosphere of her old life weighed on her, the small-town gossip, the stifling memories of a life she had tried to escape. Vanessa knew she couldn't stay. She needed a fresh start, somewhere else. But she also felt a strange pull to Greenwood Hills, as though unresolved threads still bound her to that place and to James. In her quiet moments, she wondered about him. Had Margaret filed for divorce? Had the business empire crumbled under scandal? Vanessa had cut contact, deleting James's number and blocking him on social media. Yet a persistent ache in her heart reminded her that she still cared. One afternoon, while scrolling aimlessly through news sites on her phone, she stumbled upon an article in the Greenwood Hills Chronicle about Margaret Maxwell's latest charity initiative. A photograph accompanied the piece, Margaret standing beside hospital administrators, smiling for the cameras, looking as elegant as ever. Curiously absent from the scene was James. The caption noted that the Maxwell couple was rumored to be under strain. That was all it said, but a flicker of concern and curiosity sparked inside Vanessa. That evening she made a decision. She would return, if only briefly, to Greenwood Hills. She needed closure, an end to the restless wondering about James and the swirling rumors. She wasn't certain how she'd handle it, nor did she have a concrete plan for the future, but she knew she couldn't move on, while every hour brought fresh regrets. With a heavy heart, she booked a ticket back. Stepping off the train, Vanessa felt a cold knot in her stomach. Greenwood Hills seemed the same, its quaint boulevards lined with boutique shops and manicured lawns. But for her, every corner held memories of clandestine meetings and guilt-ridden excitement. She made her way to a modest hotel on the outskirts of town, avoiding the opulence of the downtown suites where James had once taken her. Cloaked in a nondescript coat and sunglasses, she navigated the city like a fugitive, scanning her surroundings with nerves on edge. That night, from her hotel room window, she looked out at the illuminated skyline. Familiar pangs of longing sprang up. She wondered if James was in his study, poring over documents to salvage his reputation. She pictured Margaret in the Grand Master bedroom, wearing a facade of confidence while privately nursing her wounds. In a moment of impulsiveness, Vanessa unlocked her phone and unblocked James's number. She didn't call him, didn't text him. She merely stared at the screen, her heart pounding with the realization that he was just a few digits away. Driven by a renewed sense of urgency, Vanessa vowed she would find a way to speak with James face to face. She needed to express her regrets, to see if there was any path forward, or if they were forever bound to a past marred by secrecy and betrayal. But she also feared Margaret's wrath, and the possibility that she might not be welcomed by either party, especially if the meltdown of their marriage had already reached a point of no return. Regardless of the potential consequences, Vanessa felt she had no choice. She had to confront the tangled mess she had left behind, or she would remain haunted by the ghost of her mistakes. With determination forged from desperation, she crawled into bed and tried to sleep, her mind swirling with visions of what might happen the next day. For better or worse, she was back in Greenwood Hills, and her presence was about to ignite a new wave of repercussions for them all. The following morning, grey clouds rolled across the sky, casting a somber mood over Greenwood Hills. Vanessa wrapped a scarf around her neck and ventured into the crisp autumn air, her heart thudding as she hailed a cab. She had decided to head toward the Maxwell Properties headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper of glass and steel. If James was anywhere, she figured, he would be there, trying to salvage his battered reputation. But she wasn't sure if she'd muster the courage to go inside. The taxi ride felt interminable. Each block passed a kaleidoscope of memories. The chic cafe where James had first declared he had fallen for her, the upscale boutiques she once strolled through with James's credit card in hand, the hotel where they often met for stolen afternoons. By the time the cab pulled up to Maxwell Properties, Vanessa's stomach was in knots. "Wait for me," she told the driver, paying him to keep the meter running. She stood on the sidewalk, staring at the revolving doors that led to the grand lobby. People bustled in and out, oblivious to her torment. Gathering her nerve, Vanessa stepped forward. Inside, the lobby soared upward, marble floors shining under the tasteful lighting. A wide reception desk stood at the far end. The air buzzed with corporate efficiency. Vanessa forced herself to approach the receptionist, a crisp woman wearing a polite but distant smile. "I need to see James Maxwell," Vanessa said, voice faltering slightly. The receptionist's trained composure never wavered. "Do you have an appointment?" Vanessa's throat went dry. "No, but could you just tell him Vanessa Pierce is here?" A flicker of recognition darted across the receptionist's eyes. Whether she knew the name from gossip or from instructions to turn her away, Vanessa couldn't tell. The woman offered a brief nod and placed a call to an unseen extension. Within minutes, a tall man with close-cropped hair and a stern expression approached. He introduced himself as Mr. Kevin Harris, one of James's senior advisors. "Pierce," he said in a subdued tone, "I'm afraid Mr. Maxwell is currently unavailable for personal visits." His meaning was clear, though politely phrased. Vanessa felt her nerves spike. "I understand that, but please, I just need 5 minutes with him. It's important." Harris shifted uncomfortably. A security guard hovered not far behind, as if anticipating a scene. In a quieter voice, Harris added, "With respect, Ms. Pierce, you might want to avoid contact for your own sake. This situation is complicated. If the press catches wind of you here—" He trailed off, letting the implication linger. A pang of resentment flared in Vanessa's chest. She was tired of being brushed aside, tired of feeling powerless and ashamed. "Fine," she said, swallowing hard. She spun on her heel and left the lobby, each step echoing the surge of despair swelling within her. Outside, she climbed back into the waiting cab, blinking back tears. "So that's it," she thought. "He won't even see me." She gave the driver a shaky instruction to return her to the hotel. On the way, the cab rolled through a busy intersection, and that was when Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. Through the window she glimpsed James himself, stepping out of a sleek black sedan. He was accompanied by a small entourage and looked deeply preoccupied. Vanessa reached over, tapping the driver's shoulder. "Stop here, please." She hurriedly paid the fare and stepped onto the sidewalk. James and his entourage were walking toward a swanky restaurant. Summoning her courage, Vanessa jogged closer. As she neared, James turned and his eyes locked onto hers. His face paled, and he murmured something to the men with him, who then stepped aside. Vanessa approached hesitantly, aware that passers-by might be watching. "Vanessa," James said, glancing around nervously, "what are you doing here?" She inhaled unsteadily. "I needed to see you. I tried at your office, but they wouldn't let me in." He rubbed his temples. "This is not a good time. There's a lot going on." "I know," Vanessa whispered. "But you cut me off. I was kicked out of the apartment. I lost everything. I needed answers." James's eyes flashed with pain. He cast a wary look over his shoulder. "Fine. Give me 15 minutes. Meet me around the back alley of this restaurant. We'll talk briefly. I can't do this in public." Though her pride wilted under the secrecy, Vanessa nodded. If this was the only way to speak to him, she'd do it. With that, James disappeared into the restaurant, leaving Vanessa with a combination of relief and foreboding swirling in her gut. She only had to wait a few more minutes to learn if their reunion might offer any resolution or merely serve to tear open wounds that had never truly closed. Behind the lavish restaurant, the alley was a far cry from Greenwood Hill's usual charm. Dripping water from a gutter spout formed a small puddle on the concrete, and the scent of discarded produce lingered in the air. Vanessa stood there, arms wrapped around herself for warmth, until James appeared. He glanced over his shoulder twice, as though ensuring he wasn't being followed. Then he closed the distance between them. They stared at each other for a long moment, the tension so thick it was nearly suffocating. Vanessa was the first to speak, her voice shaking. "Why did you abandon me, James? You promised to take care of me. And then, poof, I was left with nothing. I felt like a leper." James raked a hand through his hair, eyes wrought with guilt. "Margaret locked down our accounts. She's pursuing legal action. My reputation is in tatters. I panicked. I didn't know what to do." Anger and heartbreak mingled in Vanessa's expression. "So you just cut me off without warning? You let me lose my apartment, my support, everything?" Tears stung at the corners of her eyes. James sighed heavily, guilt etched into the lines of his face. "I'm sorry. I know I made terrible choices. I never wanted to hurt you, but I had to prioritize." "I get it," Vanessa interrupted bitterly, wiping away a tear. "You had to prioritize your marriage, your fortune, your name, so I meant less to you after all." "It's not that simple," James said, voice wavering. "I've been trying to figure out how to fix this, how to appease Margaret's demands while keeping everything afloat. She wants to renegotiate the marriage contract. Divorce might ruin me financially and publicly. I didn't have a choice but to focus on that first." Silence enveloped them like a shroud. The truth stood stark. Their affair had been built on secrets, and it was unraveling under the weight of public scandal and personal betrayal. Suddenly, the echo of footsteps reached them. They turned to see Margaret standing at the end of the alleyway, her arms folded. Even in this dingy setting, she radiated an air of controlled power. James stiffened, and Vanessa's heart plummeted to her stomach. Margaret approached slowly, each step echoing with foreboding. "I see you two have found a new hiding place," she said, words measured. She eyed James with a penetrating gaze. "You didn't really think you could have a private conversation in my city without me knowing, did you?" James swallowed hard. "Margaret, She lifted a hand, silencing him. Turning to Vanessa, she said, "I've spent the last few days reconsidering how best to handle this. My lawyers believe the scandal may subside if I make a public display of forgiveness. That is, if James meets certain conditions." Vanessa's brows knitted. "Forgiveness?" she repeated, struggling to keep her voice steady. She could hardly believe Margaret would consider such an option. Margaret nodded, her gaze unwavering. Yes, I can orchestrate a narrative of a repentant husband and a magnanimous wife. It helps our social standing, it preserves the business to some extent, and it spares James from total ruin. But that plan requires you, Miss Pierce, to vanish from this story, publicly and permanently. Vanessa felt her chest tighten. Of course, she was to be the sacrificial lamb so the wealthy couple could maintain their standing. She glanced at James, who couldn't quite meet her eyes. A swirling mixture of fury and despair coursed through her veins. Margaret continued, her voice glacially calm. I'm prepared to offer you a sum of money, enough to set you up in a new life elsewhere, on condition that you sign a non-disclosure agreement and leave Greenwood Hills forever. Vanessa's lips parted in shock. Even James gaped at Margaret, as though he hadn't expected such a proposition. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the dripping water from the gutter. Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest. Freedom from this nightmare, yet at the price of becoming invisible, her own story silenced. Could she accept that? Margaret reached into her blazer pocket, producing a folded document. Think it over, but not for long. Time is money, and reputations are even more precious. And there, in that cramped, damp alleyway, 3 shattered hearts weighed their destinies. The final choice rested with Vanessa. Accept the deal and live with the knowledge of her role in this twisted love triangle, or refuse and risk further destruction for all 3 of them. In that weighted silence, the fate of their entwined lives hung in precarious balance. Tension crackled in the air as Margaret's ultimatum sank in. James stood torn, trapped between his wife's calculated offer and the mistress he once claimed to love. Vanessa's breath caught, realization dawning that all her decisions had led to this fraught moment. After everything, the moonlit orchard, the secrets, the shattered vows, the tangled threads of their affair converged here. What would she do? Thank you for staying with us to the end of this dramatic journey. If you found yourself immersed in the twists of fate, the high-stakes betrayal, and the unrelenting emotional battles, we invite you to like this video, share it with friends who love a gripping romance drama, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that delve into the deepest corners of human passion and ambition. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another riveting tale. Your support helps us continue crafting stories that keep you on the edge of your seat.